Hello everybody, I hope you're doing marvellously well. I hope you're staying safe, happy and healthy. We're big, we're bad, we're not dressed in black, we're dressed in blue, and we're back for another Fact Friday. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe. You can hit the notification bell, and of course you'll be notified when we have some new videos. And of course, you can go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list and get a whole bunch of free goodies. We've got some lovely questions here. I'm a little confused about what is good enough when it comes to the final mix before mastering. When a mix is clean enough, or what to leave for the mastering process. For example, on one tutorial, I heard a famous mixer finish a mix, and of course the mix sounded perfectly balanced, tight and polished. But to me, a little bit muddy. But I doubt the final master track sounded like that. Just sort of hitting on a point, great mastering engineers are worth, I've said it already once, I'll say it again, worth their weight in gold. That seems to be today's phrase. A great mastering engineer will kind of go in there and maybe cut out some of those low mids that you were hearing as being a little excessive. Maybe the high mids got a little crowded and there's some like wispiness, and mastering engineers will put DSs across there. Really light de-essing just to keep the mix sounding bright, but without getting like these annoying frequencies. There's all kinds of tricks that people do. We have the Produce Like a Pro Academy, and there's some people in there that turn in mixes that are just unbelievable. That you've never heard of these guys and girls. And their mixes are just unfreaking believable, and they're just as competitive as any of like the big six, mixers that we talk about. This is a funny business we're in. We're in a business where reputations were built about 15 or 20 years ago when there was superstar, mixers and superstar producers and engineers. It's hard now to become a superstar engineer, producer, or mixer. It just is. And increasingly, guys and girls like yourself are learning to become great engineers, great producers, and great mixers. And labels are taking in these productions and these mixes and going, they may have made the whole record for $50,000. Why are they going to pay more than that to have somebody remix it when the mix is really great? The whole world is changing. And that is a wonderful thing. We're part of that revolution. You are all part of that revolution. So my point is like there's a lot of really talented people out there. Success from 15 or 20 years ago is fantastic. And I love so many of those people. They're so talented. I particularly love the guys like, Jack Douglas and Shelley Yakus and Jay Messina and Roy Sakala. Those people in America really influenced what I listen to. And then in England, of course, and in the UK, it was guys like John Leckie and Jeff Emmerich and George Martin. They made some of my favorite sounding records. The reality is that they came from a different world. They didn't come from the world of superstar mixers. They were all engineering and producing their own records, and then they were getting released. So coming back to this world that we're in now is not actually new. When you go and listen to A Night at the Opera or, ELO Out of the Blue, any of those albums, Pink Floyd, you're listening to the people that made the record, mixing it. Not a third-party person who was given a bunch of files to get it radio-friendly. So all of those classic albums, Led Zeppelin, Genesis, all of the albums that we consider to be the greatest albums of all time were recorded, produced, engineered, and mixed by the same people. The people that were recording the records also mixed them. It was the beginning in the late 70s and early 80s that stuff started going to separate mixers, people that were mixers. And, Jack told me, in his opinion, it was his humble story was that he was making a record with Aerosmith in one room and Bruce Springsteen was making a record in the other room. They were behind in the schedule, so Bob Clearmountain started mixing some of that Bruce Springsteen record. And in New York, there suddenly became this idea of a mixer. And it was an amazing idea from the perspective as you could have somebody in a room next door that you could go in and listen to the mixing while you were still tracking. So it was a natural sense of osmosis. That kind of thing had existed. But then, of course, all the way through the 80s and particularly the 90s, the superstar mixer came up. The reality is like when we all list our top 10 favorite albums of all time, like I said, a lot of those, if you look at the Rolling Stone Hot 100 Greatest Albums, I would say so many of those, a high percentage of those, are made by the engineer and producer all the way through from start to finish. So what you're talking about here points to something. You understand your tracks. You have a potential as a producer and an engineer of your own music or other people's music to see it through to the end. You can see it through to the end. You can learn how to mix. You can watch these videos you're talking about, and you can listen to the superstar mixer do the mix, and you can think, well, it still lacks something. The low mids are still a little too stodgy. Is the mastering engineer going to do it? Yeah, the mastering engineer probably is going to pull some of that out. But you know what? You can learn from that perspective and mix the tracks without that low mid in there. Instead of like letting a mastering engineer pull out 350 for the mixer, go in and discover where in the track that 350 build-up is and pull it out. You know, I've done a lot of albums with Jack. He didn't like the idea of handing over the tracks to somebody else because the albums that he made, like Rocks and Toys in the Attic, for instance, two of the most successful and the best-sounding rock albums of all time, were recorded and mixed by him and Jay Messina. And they made the records together and they finished them, and their vision was there the whole way. So what I'm saying here is feel empowered. Be empowered. Remember that the greatest albums of all time, the Queen, the Beatles, the Stones, Zeppelin, there wasn't separate mixers. There were the engineers and the producers who were working on it. You pick up a Stones album and look on the back, it doesn't say mixed by. That was something that happened from like Tattoo You on. But before that, it was, you know, all made by the people involved. So don't sell yourself short because, you know, superstar mixer, you can't understand why does that not sound the way you would anticipate it. Well, that's okay. That's their vision, and it might not fit your vision. See yours through. Do the best you can. Produce, engineer, and mix your album in the same way that the greatest albums of all time were made. And if you feel like it isn't coming together the way you want, and you want to give somebody else the opportunity to mix it, try somebody out. Try somebody you know. Collaborate with people. You're going to learn from each other. And maybe that person will teach you something more about mixing, and you'll learn something else. But also, just maybe, you might be the only person that understands that recording. I've had it happen to me 100 times where I can name you a lot of mixes where I'm on 13 revisions. You know, back in the early 2000s, when we were giving a lot of records out to third-party mixers, we were 13, 4. I know one song that had 17 revisions that's on the radio to get it to sound right, to sound amazing, to do well and be very successful. So, yeah, you as the person making the album, recording the artist, will hear music in an incredibly unique way, and you'll bring so much to it. So, yes, mix it, do the best you can, remember that great albums were made that way, and then if you're not happy with the mix, maybe reach out, find some other people. But you're quite right in pointing this out. There is no, 100% right all the time. If it was as simple as paying somebody a big check who was a famous mixer, then every time that famous mixer mixed an album, it would be on the radio. And we all know that is not how it works. That is not the secret to great music. It is the song, and the song, the performance, and the production, and the engineering, and then the mixing. It's definitely not. A mix can ruin a song if it's really, really bad. But think of all those tracks from the 50s and the 60s where some of the instruments are so loud, the vocals are buried, the drums are barely in it. You know, I listened to something the other day, Beck's Bolero. It's just all cymbals. That was a top 10 single all over the world. You can't hear the drums. Keith Moon's playing on it, and you hear that drum break in a gap, and then it just goes shh. Didn't stop it selling multi-millions. Still sounds super exciting. So yes, learn your craft, get better at it, become an amazing mixer, get really, really talented. But don't buy into the idea that, big money spent on something is always going to get the best results. You, as the person making the recording and being involved with the artist, or being the artist yourself and doing it, can do so much greatness. And I can just think of album after album after album. The new Fiona Apple album proves that. A lot of it was mixed by Chad Blake, who's incredible. Dave Way mixed a couple of songs. But the engineer and the producers on the record largely is Fiona Apple and her band. The drummer, Amy Eileen Wood, was the main engineer. I think engineered 99% of it. I know Dave Way did a few overdubs, but was the main engineer on the record and the drummer. It's incredibly good sounding record. And it was mixed by Chad Blake, who I would say inarguably is one of the most artistic mixers in the world. And probably one of the few people that you could throw into, Mark Ender's probably another one, Spike Stent. There's these guys that can get into an album and maintain the art. It still sounds like the artist. They experiment. They do things that just really twist it up. Chad is the king of that. Listen to the new Green Day record. Listen to how exciting that is. I know Butch Walker really wanted Chad to mix that record. And you listen to it and you're like, there's a reason why he wanted it. There are mixers that don't just have a sound and a way of doing things and then it's all just like, it's just done like that. No, there are people that get in there and get stuck in and maintain the art. But the reality is like the records we grew up listening to and loving weren't made that way. They were made by producers and engineers that mixed their own stuff because they were recording and committing to tape. So it wasn't a question of like what compressor or EQ they could use. That was printed on the tape. They would have like 8 parts bounced to one track. So the mixer comes along and there's 8 guitars on a track. Sometimes there's a bass line on a track with a tambourine and a background. That is not unheard of. I've heard many mixes with at least 3 completely different instruments on it. So the superstar mixer can only do so much. The engineer was committing those tones. The engineering on Bohemian Rhapsody, that's what the production's about. The recording on that is unbelievable. Go and watch the making of the Night at the Opera DVD, and it's beautiful. Brian May talks about Mike Stone a lot. He talks about what an amazing engineer he was. Yeah, he did some incredible things. All of those backgrounds bounced a couple of tracks. The layers of stuff, the incredible harmony, guitar parts, everything on that whole record, let alone just Bohemian Rhapsody, the whole album is an engineering masterpiece. And Mike Stone, God rest his soul, went on to become a very successful producer because he was an incredible engineer. Not to take anything away from Roy Thomas Baker, the producer, but you understand, those were the guys making the record. You bring those multi-tracks up on fader and balance them in about 5 minutes, and that is the album. That's the way they recorded it. What's the superstar mixer going to do? What are they going to do? They're going to put a kick sample on or a snare sample on there. You know, you understand my point. So, yes, it's a really good question. You heard it. You still felt like the mastering engineer would need to do something to make it radio ready. That's probably right. But it does point to something. The idea that there's a handful of geniuses and everybody else is useless, I hate that idea. I hear it every day. It comes at me from all different corners and all these different YouTube channels, or, what was great about this and what was great about that. Well, you know what? There's greatness everywhere. I meet people every day. I listen to demos every day of incredibly talented people. So don't sell yourself short. You've got a good ear. You heard something. Go make that music yourself. Go and do it. I've been studying music business for years, and I'm trying to get my foot in the door. I've applied for admin positions at a few major labels, as I feel admin is my best bet. I see opportunities at smaller companies, but they only want interns, and I've had full-time jobs for years. Now, I won't mind starting at a small company, but I just want to know the best possible way to get a job. I can tell you about a lot of guys and girls that interned for major labels that I'm friends with that still have jobs in the music industry. Phil Allen interned at Epic Records when I was working over there, and I was doing a lot of albums for Epic when I was doing the Frey stuff and Augustana and Vedera. Those were all Epic bands. And he was an intern over there at 18 years old, and he was great. After doing his first summer internship at Epic, I took him and he came and worked with me in the studio. And then he worked, we put on a festival and he helped put on a festival. And if you know any of the stories about him, that's how he became the successful guy he is now. The reality is major labels take on interns from good schools. In Los Angeles, the USC music business course, for instance, is incredibly well respected. So a lot of students that go and do the music business course at USC will get internships at major labels. Major labels like to hire people that have been inside the system and understand it. So if you've already interned at a major label, even if they didn't offer you a job, applying to other major labels with that experience on your resume and also with some schooling in a music business background will increase your chances of getting a job. Now, if you've already been working for years, I'd have to know what you've been working in. But if you've been working at an administrative level, that's good. And it's probably great if you understand facts and figures and, can work well with numbers. And those are all really good things. But you're going to have something in your resume that says music, that says entertainment. Just employing somebody purely and simply because they fit a job description isn't really going to work that well. I mean, ultimately, let's just say you ran a boat building business and you needed somebody to run your office, and you had two candidates, and one of them had run offices before as an office manager for, a paper manufacturing company. And the other one, The Office comes to mind, and then the other one had worked in shipbuilding of some description. Who's going to get the job? I know that sounds really obvious, but it's something to remember. Build your experience working in our industry. If it's difficult for you to take time off to intern somewhere, I get it, but it is something that's going to build your resume in that genre. Eric, sitting over there, interned with us for a long time. Now, he was only able to do 1, 2, or 3 days originally. So he did that for quite a few months before he was able to become full-time and then eventually start getting paid. And that is true of pretty much everybody I've ever employed. They've come in, they've interned, they've learned the ropes. Otherwise, you know what happens is you pay people before they can actually make you money. So what happens is you spend a year or two investing a lot of time, money, and energy training somebody to actually be able to do the job that they would get paid for. It's very unlikely that you can get a job in a major label, for instance, without some kind of experience, because otherwise somebody's going to take half of their day to train you to understand what they're doing. So yes, they do like to hire within. If you look at major labels, go and find somebody at a major label on LinkedIn, and they will have worked at, with a few exceptions, most of them will have worked at 2, 3, or 4 different labels in their career. Whether they're doing admin or A&R or whatever it might be, they've moved from one label to another. But if I'm at Warner's, I might take somebody from Epic or Capitol if they've spent 5 or 10 years there, because I'm thinking to myself, they understand the business. It's going to be very easy to slot them in. I'm not going to have to train them. That's why actually doing an internship at a major label isn't a bad idea. I think it's actually, if you can afford to take 6 months and go, or 3 months or whatever a summer would be, and go and work at a major label, and you can actually get that job at a major label as an intern, I say take it. Obviously, you have to financially be able to afford to live on, no money. But if you can do it, it will give you a wonderful thing to put on your resume. Then, frankly, getting a job at a small label is probably going to be quite easy, because you can say, oh, I worked at, I was an assistant for 6 months at whatever major label. Then going to apply for an indie label is going to be a shoo-in. It's going to be very, very easy. I wouldn't have a problem with the internship because it's worth its weight in gold. Pretty much everybody I can think of in this industry that I've worked with has interned at some place in their life. They've interned and they've worked for free because, frankly, they've had to be trained to be payable. It's very difficult to walk into a job like this and say, can you set up an SSL when you've never worked on an SSL before? Even if you've been to school for it, you'd be amazed at how different it is recalling an SSL. Eric can do it in his sleep now, but he couldn't when he first came here. Eric can edit and do all kinds of stuff at a pretty fast speed, but he couldn't when he first came here. So if I'd sat with him every single day while paying him to edit when we have a deadline, you see what I'm saying? It's like the internship makes perfect sense. You get to learn at the rate that you can learn, and then it becomes a point when, quite frankly, every intern, if they're really working hard, becomes completely indispensable. And you're at that point where, I can't do my job if I lose this person. So that's when you start paying them. And that's when they become worth their weight in gold. So if you did get an internship at a major label, once again, I'll repeat myself, you actually did get that opportunity and you could afford to do it, I'd actually take it. It's a great thing to have on your resume. If not, and you want to work in admin, you've just got to keep applying and applying and applying and hoping that you're not running up against people that are similarly qualified, maybe doing admin, but have also already worked in the music industry. Because if they've already got that opportunity, even as an intern, they're going to be a more favorable person because you're going to be like, that person's worked for a summer at Warner's in admin and is now applying for a job doing that same job. You understand where I'm going? And I know I'm repeating myself, but I really hope that point comes home. Now, if you've got more comments and questions about it, please leave them below. I'd love to get involved in this. This is really, really important. It's a great discussion, and thank you for the wonderful question. Sometimes I like to, quite heavily, compress my drum bus with a very slow attack, but the first kick hit jumps out. It's too loud. The compressor needs to start up. What is a good way to fix this? Now I tend to already feed the compressor sound, but mute the channel with automation and unmute when the drums really start. You've got to ask yourself, if you're getting that, what we call fishtailing. In fact, I learned that from Stephen Markison, the mastering engineer. Fishtailing is, from your position looking at me, is when you get a transient that's like this, and then everything kind of squashed. And you get these fishtails. Now, if you're only getting them on the first hit, that's a tough one, because that's not just speaking about your attack time, that's also speaking about your release time. Because if you had a fast enough release time or a fast-ish release time and a slow attack time, you would actually get fishtailing all over the place. You get these really super fast attacks. So what it sounds like to me you're doing is you are using a slow attack time, but you're also using a slow release time. You understand what I mean? So if you had that slow attack time, yes, you're going to get that peak, that transient coming up. But if you've got a slow release time, then what's happening is it's still squashing it down. So when the next attack comes in, it hasn't come back fully enough before it's compressing it again. So that will get only the initial hit. So depends on what you're trying to do. Because it seems like if it's only the first one that gives you the transient, then why are you doing the slow attack? The reason why most of us use slow attacks on drums is to get that pap, 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 that sound. But you can't get a fast pap, 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 pap if your release time's super slow and it's still compressing. You understand what I mean? You won't get pap, pap, pap. You'll get pap, pap. You'll only, after the release comes up, will that transient ever come back through again. So it seems like you're not getting the benefit of the slow attack time. If you want to use that slow attack time, then speed up your release a little bit so you get the benefit of the transients like this, at least control them a little bit. If not, if you still want to just completely annihilate it and not have any transients come through, then I think you've got to find that happy balance between getting the attack to be slow enough so you get a little bit of those transients, the release to be quick enough so it's a little bit more like this. And then if you really are just trying to go for that almost brick walling, then just put some gentle limiting across it. Put some gentle limiting across it that only gets the peaks. So you see what I mean? So you're going to get like these little transients, but you're going to get this big wash that you sounds like you're going for because you're only getting one attack at the moment. And then just put like an L1 or an L2 across it, depending on how you want it to sound, you know, some kind of limiting. And just catch the transients only. I mean, you could pretty much do that here. You could put an L1 across it. If you don't want to change, don't want to listen to any of my suggestions here, totally understand. Just stick a limiter only catching the peak. So that first peak doesn't do this. It just hits. And then everything else, because it's a peak that's standing like this above everything else, have the limiter come in here, wipe that off, and it doesn't even touch the rest of the track. You could do that. I think either way, I would be questioning and trying to understand what you're trying to achieve with the slow attack if that's the only transient that sounds like that. You know what I mean? It's getting that balance between the attack and release time. I've seen it before. I've been given mixes many, many times where the first beat's like this, and then everything else is like annihilated and squashed. And what I've done on some of those times when I've been given those mixes to master is I take that first beat in the song and I gain it down before the compressor just came in. I just gain it down. I've been given that by a couple of different fairly well-known mixers that have really smashed their mixes quite hard on their, on their master bus, but haven't quite got that attack time right at the beginning and for a lot of it. And I've had to put an expander on there and try and pull out some of the attack again, because of the release time killing the attacks. Yeah. Anyway, lot to think about. So thanks ever so much. That was a lot of fun. Please leave a whole bunch of comments and questions below. I really, really appreciate it. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing. Please stay safe, happy, and healthy. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. There's a notifications bell, which will notify you when we have more videos. And of course, if you haven't already, please sign up for Produce Like a Pro, and you'll get a whole bunch of free goodies. And if you want, join us in the Academy. Join us. It's a lot of fun. Have a marvelous time.